Here's what we've been doing the last several weeks. We've been just walking through Christmas at KHC, and we've been thinking through this phrase, "'tis the season." And that phrase, "'tis the season," probably pulled your mind into the song, "'Tis the season to be jolly." In the last couple of weeks, we've been asking the question, okay, there's some things that we're supposed to feel because of the arrival of Jesus, but what happens when it's that season and we don't feel those things? What happens when it's that season and we don't feel immensely hopeful? What does the arrival of Jesus do to remind me of hope? What happens in that season when I'm supposed to feel peace, but I don't feel peaceful because the world's kind of chaotic around me? And to quote the specific song, "'Tis the season to be jolly." What happens in this season if I don't feel joy? And so very simply, I'm going to take us straight to our main idea. Obedience is the unlikely path to joy. Now, as I said that, some of you are like, you already started off on the wrong foot. Like, if you're trying to convince me to be happy and you're telling me to obey the rules, we done. But my hope is that over the next few moments, as we walk through this portion of Matthew 2, that we'll see that the Lord is doing something through those that are willing to submit and listen to him versus those that do not. Let me pray, and we'll jump in. So, Father, I pray, I know that even using the word obedience feels distasteful in a culture that is about self-expression and autonomy and having the ability to go after what we want, when we want, how we want, particularly in a season when, because we are receiving things, we're probably more consumers than contributors. The word obedience feels like it's distancing. But Lord, I pray over the next few moments that as we walk through your word, that we would see this beautiful picture of how being obedient to you and your word draws us into a place of joy that would seem unlikely and unattainable for us. So give us the grace to trust you. It's in your matchless name I pray. Amen. Matthew chapter 2, starting on verse 1, says this. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star at its rising and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. So he assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people and asked them where the Messiah would be born. In Bethlehem of Judea, they told him, because this is what is written by the prophet. And then they're quoting Micah here, and it says, "And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, because out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel." Then Herod secretly summoned the wise men and asked them the exact time the star appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. When you find him, report back to me so that I too can go and worship him." So as we drop in, we've been walking through Matthew's narrative of the birth of Jesus, and now we've arrived. Jesus is born. But there's something really unique about the text because it says that Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, and up to this point, Matthew's actually not given us any geographic markers. You start reading through chapter 1, like you have no idea where they're from, where they're going. And so it kind of starts to feel like, okay, thanks for telling me where his hometown is, but that actually doesn't feel like relevant information. Except for we've spent a lot of time over the 8+ years that I've been here talking about this reality in the scriptures that when you see something repeated in close proximity, that thing is meant to grab your attention and be really important. And so this idea of Bethlehem of Judea or Bethlehem or Judea by themselves shows up 6 times in these 8 verses. Or something like 6 times, maybe 5 times. My count may be off. But it shows up a lot in a short proximity. And the question is why? Like, why do we care about that? Like, why does this detail matter? You haven't told us any other geographic markers before. Why does this matter all of a sudden? And then the second thing is that he also starts mentioning Jerusalem at the same time. And so now we're getting all of this geography that feels distant to us, like it actually doesn't make the story come more alive, but there's something going on here. And then you have these magi, these wise men, showing up and saying, hey, we're coming to worship. And so there's some things here that are pretty logical. Like, if somebody's going to be born as a king, you probably should go to the palace, and the palace being in Jerusalem, so it makes sense to show up there. But there's a whole bunch of awkwardness under the obvious. So this may be a logical starting point, but it's also got some awkwardness behind it. So here's one of the things that is awkward. When they very first speak, they say to Herod, hey, we've come to worship the one who's been born the king of the Jews. Now, you may not know this about Herod, but Herod was not born to be where he was. I'll talk a little bit more about who he was in his life here in just a moment, but this would have been an unintentional but still cutting remark to hear, hey, there's somebody that's actually been born into this, not somebody who stumbled or worked their way into this. In fact, just for verification, if you wanted to back up to chapter 1 and look at that genealogy, there's a lot of names of a lot of people that held important positions, but Herod is not one of them because he is not of the line of Judah. He is not one of the sons of David. He is not meant to be where he is. So that's awkward in and of itself. But here's the other thing. They show up bringing gifts. We'll find out about the gifts later. They show up at this dude's house and be like, hey, we have come to worship the one who's the king that we've heard about. And then they're standing in front of the guy who's currently the king. They don't give him no stuff and he doesn't get worshiped. Like, this feels kind of awkward. Like in that that day and age, when you go to somebody important and you're trying to do something important, you should honor them in some way. They're like, hey, we're coming to see the king of the Jews. Oh, you're not him? All right, we'll figure it out. Like, this feels super awkward. But maybe even more than the awkwardness of they're making a statement that would reflect negatively on Herod unintentionally, and maybe even more than the awkwardness of they have come to worship the king and they're in front of the king and they don't worship him, is the statement that Herod gets this news and it says that he's deeply disturbed. In fact, verse 3 would say it this way. When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Now, there's this unique thing that the Bible does oftentimes when it talks about a place, that this place takes on a personality or becomes personified. And so if you're reading through the Psalms, that oftentimes it would talk about Zion or talk about Jerusalem, it would give it personal characteristics. And this is unique because here Matthew is doing the same thing and saying Jerusalem is taking on these personal characteristics, and they happen to be taking on the personal characteristics of the leader. Now, it's important that you understand why Herod might be deeply disturbed. Herod's background, his backstory is both fascinating and confusing. And so if you backed up several generations even before he was alive, there is this family called the Homosans that decided they were sick of Greek rule, and so they were going to fight it and push them back, and so they begin to do that, and they begin to raise up these high priest rulers, and there's multiple generations of them. And as the multiple generations are going, at some point there's one of the rulers named Alexander, and Alexander decides that he is going to become more and more Greek. So he just starts doing Greek things, like he starts calling himself a king, which was massive taboo for them because it's like, hey, you're not a king unless you've been anointed king by God. And all of a sudden this guy is calling himself both high priest and king. And so now he's taking both the church and the state and combining them together. And we can see how that could be problematic. And then not only that, but instead of passing on the throne to his kids, he decides to pass on his throne to his wife. Now, you don't know who this guy is and you don't really care, but what happens is that because he passes on the throne to her, she then has two sons, and the kingdom then becomes divided between these two sons. Aristobulus, that dude didn't win the name lottery. And Hyrcanus. And Hyrcanus is trying to jockey for position, but all of the high priests and Pharisees go with Aristobulus. And so now that he's like, okay, I'm just going to give it up, the throne split. But then all of a sudden, Rome gets involved in the picture, and Hyrcanus aligns himself with Rome, and all of a sudden they run this revolt. And all of a sudden he is in power, Rome is in power, and Pompey is backing him, and all of a sudden he's the guy. And then, weirdly enough, Aristobulus and Hyrcanus, they have children. Hyrcanus has a daughter, he has a son, and they end up getting married, which is awkward. But then that big rejoins the line, and during that time period under Hyrcanus, there's a man named Antipater, and Antipater starts serving him, and Antipater has a son, and his son is named Herod. And so now all of a sudden, there's this family that is not connected to this family that was trying to restore Jewish rule. They're actually these outsiders that have been conquered by Hyrcanus the First. They're all of a sudden now acting Jewish, becoming Jewish, taking on the practices so they can keep their homeland, but they're not really the right people. They're aligning themselves with Rome, trying to massage and get themselves in the right places, and all of a sudden Hyrcanus dies. And all of a sudden, Julius Caesar is taken over. He pushes people out. And then when Julius Caesar dies, it just so happens that Herod is good buddies with Mark Antony. Now you're like, hey, I know these names. I ignored these names in my high school English class. And so Mark Antony now has become friends with Herod, and Herod is now beginning to rule. And so here's what happens. Herod just tries to consolidate his power. So anybody that would be a threat to him, he tries to deal with. So for instance, the mother of his wife wants her son, the brother of his wife, to be the high priest, but instead he decides that he's going to name his buddy from Babylon the high priest. She starts complaining about it, and so he's like, all right, I'll bring him in as the high priest, and then I'll just have him drowned at the palace. Or she herself was a problem for him, and so he has her imprisoned, and because he's worried anytime that he would go off to do political affairs, that she would start a rebellion. And so over and over again, he keeps trying to deal with her, and eventually he just decides, hey, I'm going to have her be executed. And then Mark Antony gets killed in battle by Octavian, who becomes Augustus, and so Augustus is now in charge, and he finds a way to cozy up to Augustus, and Augustus says, well, you know what, you're not just going to be this ruler, I'm going to make you king. And so now he's king, and so now he's got this power, and at the same time, his sister's going through a divorce, and because he doesn't like his sister's husband and he conspired against him, he has him killed. And then the one person that he really, truly, deeply loves is his wife, and his wife is actually his real attachment to the true royal family, but they start having some beef. In fact, he goes off to war, and he starts decreeing to his people, hey, if I die in battle, make sure that you kill her also, because I don't want her to marry anybody else. That is weirdly romantic and overly controlling. And so she gets wind of this and becomes upset with him. And then she realizes, I don't need you. I'm actually part of the royal family. You and your family are just also rants. And so his sister says, you need to deal with her. So he kills his wife. His sons from that wife grow up, get sent to Rome. They were like, man, we can't really trust this dude. We can't forgive him. So they grow up, seem like they're going to come to power. And just because they make him a little bit nervous, he kills them also. And then he has a son who's also named Antipater, and he decides, you're going to be king after me. And then decides, nah, never mind, and kills him also. So you just need to know, he was not good at family disagreements. He is this insecure leader who's dangerous to those that are around him. In fact, there was a saying that was said of him, I don't know if it was true, but it was said of him that it would be better to be his pig than to be his child, because he had slaughtered a whole bunch of family members. And so there's this reality that this insecure leader that's getting rid of and killing people to try and consolidate his power all throughout his rule and his reign, that when he hears that somebody else might be king of the Jews, he's going to get a little bit hot under the collar. He's going to get a little bit nervous about what's happening in the world around him. And so there's this tension of him feeling this threat because somebody's coming to the throne. But then there's also Jerusalem, and it says that Jerusalem was also disturbed. And people who are smarter than me are debating, well, were they disturbed because Herod's got some habits and maybe he's going to start crashing out again because somebody else is a threat to the throne? Or the way Matthew often talks about Jerusalem in his gospel is that Jerusalem is always this oppositional threat to the rule and reign of Jesus. And so all of a sudden, you've got Jerusalem aligning itself with an old king, and so therefore Jerusalem is not being what Jerusalem was meant to be. And then Herod, in his disturbance, goes to the chief priest and the scribes. I was listening to Tim Mackey from the Bible Project this week, and he always calls himself a certified Bible nerd. And so he said, so Herod goes to the Bible nerds. And they say to him, oh yeah, we got the answer to your question where the Messiah should be born. Because out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel. Now, if you jump over to Micah, there's actually some small differences. So here's what Micah 5:2 would say, Bethlehem of Ephrathah, you are small among the clans of Judah, and one will come from you to be ruler over Israel for me. Now, one of the differences that's really obvious is one says Bethlehem in the land of Judah. One of them says Bethlehem Ephrathah. Ephrathah is more of an archaic name, but more so, Matthew is trying to keep showing this importance of Judah in the story of Jesus. The other thing that might feel a little bit different is what you're reading in Matthew seems to be saying that they're among the rulers of Judah, where this one says clans of Judah. That word can be translated as princes, rulers, clans, or thousands. And so Matthew just chose a translation. But the one that probably sticks out to you is, well, wait a minute. Micah seems to be saying, Bethlehem, you are small and insignificant compared to all the other tribes. But Matthew seems to be saying, no, you're not the least amongst them. You're not insignificant. So wait a minute, who's right? Because it's one thing to choose a unique translation of a word. It's another thing to get rid of an archaic term and make us pay attention to where it was located. But these two things actually feel like they're in contradiction with one another. It's as if the truth about Bethlehem is that you're small and rural and unimportant, but God has designated a purpose for you. And so from Micah's side of things, it's like, yeah, compared to what the world would see of you, you are insignificant and you're not important. But Matthew, looking back, speaking through the mouth of those that were the chief priests and scribes, would say, no, because of what's shown up all of a sudden in Bethlehem, back to verse 1, because Jesus has been born there, the story has been changed about you. All of a sudden, there's a significance about you that didn't exist before. But that's not the end of the quote. Because what Matthew would go on to say is that there's going to be a shepherd over the people. That's not actually what Micah would say next. Micah would start talking about that you come from times of old and you're eternal. But the quote actually of the end is actually from 2 Samuel chapter 5. 2 Samuel 5 verse 2 would say this: even while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led us out to battle and brought us back. The Lord also said to you, you will shepherd my people, Israel, and you will be ruler over Israel. So this is a quote about David after Saul has died and he's at Hebron and all the tribes have come to him and he's consolidating the people. And they say, hey, even while Saul was in office, you were actually the one that was our king. Even while Saul was in office, you were actually the one that really cared for us and led us and was the one anointed by God to be over us. And so capture what Matthew is doing. Matthew's taking these two quotes and he's saying, hey, here's what God's doing. He's validating his word. He's changed the story by raising up the king that's to come out of Bethlehem, but also the king that's on the throne ain't the real king. The king that's on the throne ain't the real shepherd. The king that's on the throne ain't the one that's really caring for the people, but the one that's being raised up out of Bethlehem, yeah, he's the one. So then Herod calls the wise men to him and he's like, hey guys, it's going to be in Bethlehem. Go find him. Come back and let me know so I can go worship him also. And you don't have to be a Bible scholar. You just have to have watched a kid's movie to know that dude lying. And so they go off, unknowingly having revealed that Bethlehem is going to be the place of the birth of this new king. And then verse 9 would say this: after hearing the king, they went on their way. And there it was, the star they had seen at its rising. It led them until it came and stopped above the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy. Entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and falling to their knees, they worshiped him. They opened their treasures and presented him with gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their own country by another route. I think here's the key question. Why are they rejoicing? Right? Like they don't fully, we can tell this far in the text, they don't fully understand what's going on, but all of a sudden the star leads them to this specific house in Bethlehem and they're excited about, but what's fully happening here? And so some would debate, okay, like how does the star thing work? Here's the short answer: we don't know. People smarter than me were like, well, it was a comet. And then they're like, but it wasn't Halley's Comet because Halley's Comet was like 10 years before. I'm like, the fact that you even know that is impressive to me. Some people they called it a planetary conjunction. and that it had to do with Saturn and Jupiter and the Pisces constellation and how it came together to tell a story. I didn't pay that much attention in science class. I don't know what that means. Others were making this argument that, hey, maybe it was just this kind of supernova moment where something exploded in the sky, and that's why they saw it, and that could happen for up to 2 months of being in the sky, and there was one recorded in 7 BC, and so maybe this is that. Here's what Matthew wants you to know. That they had come to the end of their logic and their reason. Their logic and their reason led them to Herod's palace, and that wasn't the right place. But all of a sudden, the Lord seems to be leading them beyond what they could do in and of themselves and leading them to this place. Because think about the reality is, up to this point, they'd failed. They'd gone to the wrong house, talked to the wrong king, hadn't accomplished their goal. They went to the wrong city, like they are just off. And all of a sudden, God in his mercy is guiding them to where he actually wants them to be, leads them to the right house. And so no wonder there's some worship coming out of them. No wonder there's this rejoicing come out of them, because what seemed to be a massive failure all of a sudden has been redeemed by the mercy of God, that they could actually get where they were hoping to go. Amen. But let me take it a step further, because I don't just think it's the fact that they finally got it right. I think Matthew has something bigger in view. Even as you read this text, there are things that stick out to us. And the reason that we think that there are 3 wise men is because of the 3 gifts, the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh. And people have preached, myself included, that each one of these gifts has some significance. That gold points you to the kingliness of Jesus. That frankincense was used for when anointing was being done, or when when incense was being burned. And then myrrh specifically was used to prepare for burial. And all of those things are true. But there's actually something even beyond that that's not just about the gifts, but also just has to do with the scene. Isaiah chapter 60 is helpful. Isaiah 60 would say, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord shines over you, and you there is Jerusalem." So just wait a minute. See what Isaiah is doing is Isaiah is thinking about there's this moment when a new Jerusalem is coming. And when the nations will flock to this new Jerusalem and the world will be changed by the fact that this new Jerusalem exists. And he says there's going to be this moment where it feels like the glory of the Lord, like the sun or like a star, is going to arise and shine over the place that he's leading people. Here's what it continues to say. "For look, darkness will cover the earth, and total darkness over the peoples. But the Lord will shine over you, and his glory will appear over you." So again, there's this sense of the Lord's glory shining where there was darkness before. "Nations will come to your light, and kings to your shining brightness. Raise your eyes and look around. They will gather and come to you. Your sons will come from far away, and your daughters on the hips of nursing mothers. Then you will see and be radiant, and your heart will tremble and rejoice, because the riches of the sea will become yours, and the wealth of the nations will come to you. Caravans of camels will cover your land." Matthew doesn't talk about any camels, but your nativity set at home's got a camel in it. And the reason is because Matthew likes Isaiah, and our nativity sets and our Christmas cards combine the 2 narratives. Let me keep proving it. "Young camels of Midian and Ephah. All of them will come from Sheba. They will carry gold and frankincense and proclaim the praises of the Lord." But here's the tension that you should feel. This doesn't happen in Jerusalem. It happens in Bethlehem. That this promise was meant to be the arise, shine, for the light has come, the glory of the Lord has risen over Jerusalem. But they went to Jerusalem and the light wasn't there. They went to the palace and there was no king. They went to expecting for this thing to happen and it wasn't there. And all of a sudden they show up in Bethlehem and the light has risen. The glory of the Lord is being shown, and their response to it is what's supposed to happen in Jerusalem, as if to say Jerusalem is not about the location, but it's about the king and where he's located. It's as if to say that Jerusalem, the new Jerusalem, is not going to be built off of longitude and latitude, but it's going to be built on this submission to the true king, and wherever he is, that's where Jerusalem will be. And so they show up in this scene and they begin to see this and they begin to rejoice and worship over the child and his mother's there. And then after they get done worshiping, they open up the gifts, obeying the scriptures and giving to Jesus what belongs to him. And then they're getting ready to go back, and They're warned divinely, don't go back the way you came. Now, I know that has more to do about the path that they traveled, but can I say something in this season that oftentimes what I pray for you, what I pray for me, and particularly what I pray when this season we have more people who maybe aren't used to being in church, coming to church and leaving church, is what I pray is that they don't go back the same way that they came. Amen. I pray that they don't come back the same path, the same habits, the same attitudes, the same mindsets that they came with, but they walk out with a different way of thinking and living and seeing the beauty of who God is. I pray that they don't end up the same that they started, but they end up going back changed and going a different way. But the most intriguing thing to me in all of this is the significance of the language of worship. Now, I don't know how religious these magi were. Their specific role is that they were advisors to Eastern kings, and part of the way that they did that is that they would look at the stars and try to read the story of the stars and give fortunes. And so even when you look back at the book of Daniel, there are these people called the magicians. It's the idea of these magi, and their job was to try and interpret dreams and try and interpret what was happening in the world. I don't know how much they understood about the King of the Jews being the Messiah. I don't know how much they understood about Yahweh God, but I know that they show up and they fall to their knees and they bow down and they begin to worship. And for Matthew, worship is no small thing. For Matthew, you don't just worship people. In fact, when worship shows up in the book of Matthew, it is either a warning to not do it this way because the object of the worship is wrong, or you should do it this way because of the power of the one that's being worshiped. So for instance, in Matthew chapter 18, it's the story of a servant who can't pay his debt to the king. And it starts out that he lays down before the king and it says that he worships him. And that king is meant to be this analog for God who has the power to forgive the debt of our sins like no one else possibly could. Or the tension when Jesus is being tempted, it's not just that he is being called to eat bread. It's not just that he's called to ask God to rescue him. It's not just that he's wanting to have the kingdoms of the world, but it's that he's meant to worship to get them. And so worship has this tension tied in it that whatever the object of your worship is the thing that you submit and obey to, that you count more valuable than anything else in the world. And what I hear Herod say, and what I hear these Bible nerds saying, is that they are looking for the Messiah, the one that's the King of the Jews, that they might go and worship him, and they don't ever leave the palace. But what I see in these guys is that the proof of their desire is in their pursuit. That they're not willing to just settle for the idea of, hey, we tried to find him, we didn't find him, but they were not going to be satisfied until they actually found the one that they were looking for. And so no wonder they show up with rejoicing and worship, because the thing that they most deeply wanted has been given to them by the Lord. And so can I just ask you in this season, what is it that you desire? Because the proof of your desire will be found in your pursuit. What you actually expend effort to go after. So don't give me that Jesus is the reason for the season, but you ain't got time for him. Because the proof of your desire is in your pursuit. What you put energy towards is the thing that you want the most. I said it before, but I'll say it again. Obedience is the unlikely path to joy. There's a saying that comparison is the thief of joy. I spent an inordinate amount of time this week trying to figure out who came up with that quote. I don't know. Some people think it's Teddy Roosevelt. Some people think it's Mark Twain. Nobody knows. We have no idea. But I think we get that concept, and yet we get caught up. And so I wrote an implication this way. Our lives have been robbed of joy because we're trapped in a comparison game that none of us can win. I was talking with, I had the privilege of speaking to our students a couple of Wednesday nights ago. And before service, I was hanging out with one of them and we were talking about sports and all that stuff. And so I was talking about how I played basketball, and then I talked about running track. And so I'm gonna just share running with you a little bit. in the Olympics, there's lots of different events for runners. There's the 100, the 200, the 400, the 800. There's the relays, the 4x1, the 4x8. There's the steeplechase, which is the cool one where you got to jump up on the thing and jump over the water. There's marathon running. There's mile running. You know what's not in the Olympics? Treadmill running. Nobody's ever been like, I'll tell you, I could run on this treadmill. I sometimes, when going to the gym used to be a thing for me, like I would be on the treadmill or on the elliptical warming up and running next to the person next to me, and it's boring, right? Like I don't care how entertaining you try to make it, put a TV there, put little visualizations like you're running through the woods. Like I don't care how entertaining you try to make it, it's boring. And so you know what I would do? I would I'm racing the person next to me. So I'm like glancing over at their thing, and if they're at like 5.8, I'm like hitting the button to like 5.9, and then like something on my body starts hurting, I'll back down to 5.7, hope they didn't notice, right? But no matter how hard I worked, when we both got off the treadmill, we were in the same spot. No matter how much I visualized that I just smoked them that last 200 meters of that run, we both got off the treadmill and we were in the same spot. I say that because we jump on this treadmill of comparison. If I could get a better car than you got, if I can get that bumper sticker on the back of the car that I got that says that my kid's an honor student, your kid's not an honor student, then I win the race. If I can get my kid to be a pro athlete, even though they got my DNA and I'm nowhere near a pro athlete, and so therefore I'm going to skip church on the weekends and go to all my sporting events. Like if I can be better than them, if I can have the right money and the right friends and live in the right neighborhood and go on the right vacations, if I can do all the things, and then you get off the treadmill and you haven't gone anywhere. You've worn yourself out in this comparison race that's actually not a race because you're not going anywhere. And then the Herod of our world, our marketing machine says, but if you get a new iPhone, you'll be okay. And we keep submitting to it and obeying it, and we say we don't want it, but the proof of our desire is in our pursuit. So we get ourselves into debt and we wear ourselves out trying to get the things, and none of the things are ever going to make us happy. In fact, this week I was listening to a podcast for a show. It's called Pluribus. I'm not recommending the show, but it is kind of awesome. And the maker of the show, his name is Vince Gilligan. And he said, he was like, I was working on another show, and I was thinking through this, and he's like, I need to make a show where people just kind of get whatever they want. And he said, if you made a show where people get whatever they want, it would last till the first commercial break, and then you would turn it off because it would be awful. Even secular Hollywood knows that getting everything you want isn't for your good. And yet we jump on the treadmill and run after it anyways, wearing ourselves out, trying to be better than the person next to us who's running on a treadmill that's not getting them anywhere either. Comparison and consumption will never lead you to joy. It will just wear you out and destroy you. So what does the scriptures tell us about joy? Hebrews chapter 12. The first part of the text is famous, and I'm not skipping over it because of wanting to avoid what it says. It talks about that because we run in front of a great cloud of witnesses, and that we should lay aside the hindrance and the sin that easily ensnares us. You should know by now, I'm not afraid to talk to you about sin. But then it says, let us run with endurance the race that lies before us. Can I just give you a whole world of good? Run your race, not anybody else's. The Lord has not told you to run Mike Johnny's race, and he has not told me to run yours. Run the race that has been set before you. And then it says, keeping our eyes on Jesus, not on the numbers on anybody else's treadmill, not on the dollars in somebody else's bank account, not what's in their driveway or the bumper sticker that's on the back of what's in their driveway. Keeping our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, or the author and the finisher, the starter and the completer of our faith. For the joy that lay before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Let me paraphrase it. For the joy set before him, he was obedient even when it was hard. Comparison gets you to the place where you're in the garden and the enemy can whisper, if you want to be more like God, do what you want. Obedience gets you to the place where you say, because my joy is found in him, I'll lay down these other things that won't ultimately satisfy. Can I blow your mind for a second? Eden means pleasure. So the Garden of Eden could be translated as the Garden of Pleasure or the Garden of Delight. And at the very center of the garden is a tree that they're told they're not to eat from. And the lie that we've believed is that obedience is the enemy of our pleasure, our delight, and our joy. But the garden was designed to have obedience at the center of it. Obedience is always the unlikely path to joy. He just doesn't have a bunch of lights and signs pointing saying, hey, go this way. But what I'm seeing in the scriptures is the example of Jesus is that for the joy set before him, he was obedient to being shamed and humiliated and beaten and criticized. And yet that obedience is what God responds to. May the same be true for you. That in this season, that whatever the Lord is asking you to do and to be, you'd be faithful to that. Obedience is your unlikely path to joy. Let me pray. So, Father in heaven, help us to be a people who don't settle for the story of an insecure world trying to exalt itself as being more than what it actually is. May we not reflect the world around us and be a Jerusalem that's following Herod, but instead would we be magi, outsiders who follow after the leading of the Spirit and worship the new King. Would our joy be found in our obedience to you when there are other logical options that are being offered? Lord, our logic and our ability have not led us to what only you can provide. So even this Christmas season, would you let the light of your glory light our path and lead us to what is good? Lead us to rest in you. Lead us to trust in you. Lead us to deep worship of you. Lead us to valuing and pursuing you above all else, and would all other things be cast to the side if they're getting in the way of that. Would we not just sing about you being our deepest desire? Would we actually live it? And Lord, would you give us the grace to hit the stop button on the comparison treadmill, to get off because it's leading us nowhere, and to follow the path that you would lead us. Give us the grace of trusting you enough to obey you. This is where our joy is. It's in your matchless name I pray. Amen.
Thanks so much for checking out this message from Kings Harbor. We would love to connect with you. If you go to kingsharbor.org/hello and fill out a short connect card, that allows us the opportunity to follow up with you. Also, if this message has been a blessing to your life, we believe that the Lord wants to rule and reign in every part of who we are. That means our time, our talent, our treasure. And so if this has been a blessing, we would ask that you would consider contributing back to the ministries of Kings Harbor so we can continue to bless and help people in the same way that we hope we have done for you. With that in mind, we want you to know that our heart towards you and our heart towards the world around us is that we want to be a love-forward people. And we're praying that you would join us in that.